and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And this evening, we're welcoming back Ray Stanford. He's going to be covering some topics that we haven't actually talked before. Should be a great show. And before that, we have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the news. I hope for those of you who celebrate Christmas, you had a wonderful one. Next is New Year's coming up. Just a couple of things I want to thank everyone that supports the show. You can support our show for as little as $2 a month. All you have to do is go to podcastufo.com, and on the menu bar, you see it there. And if you can't support the show and you want to listen to the full show, all you have to do is listen live. The same web address, podcastufo.com, every Wednesday at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It also plays on the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that's Thursdays. That's 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. Well, Alejandro, I hope you had a nice Christmas.
I did have a good Christmas. I do celebrate it, and I think, well, last time on your show, I talked about kind of the new Christmas, kind of a legend, and people can go listen. That's a plug to go listen to your last show to hear more about that. But, yeah, it was pretty good. Relaxed, no major drama, which, of course, families are prone to.
Yeah.
But it's nice not to have it.
That's
so,
right.
Yeah.
Did you go to Colorado, or did you stay in?
I stayed here. I am gonna go to Colorado weekend after next, and to kind of do a post-Christmas Christmas with my Colorado family. Just kind of a short weekend, but yeah, it was good. How about you?
Great. It was. I was at a resort, and just kind of chilled out, and it was really relaxing, very relaxing.
Wow. You're a high roller out there, aren't you? I mean, you go to resorts for Christmas. You explain this huge estate that you live on with a couple buildings and everything.
Wow. If you only knew, Alejandro.
Yeah.
I do enjoy living in Maine because, you get all the seasons, and Christmas is a great time to be in Maine.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. You know what's cool? Cool Christmas. Jason, your last guest, they usually go to Vegas for Christmas.
Oh, that would be interesting.
Yeah, I think that would be fun. My girlfriend and I think it was last year, went to Vegas the weekend after Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was like on a Thursday or Friday, and we left from there, and we had a great time. It was, you get some good deals, and it was a lot of fun. So, yeah, I get jealous. I think that would be fun personally.
Yeah, I like to do different things like that. That would be a blast, actually.
Doing Christmas like a Kardashian.
Right. And
in Vegas.
One of the people that helps out with the show lives in Las Vegas.
Oh, okay.
Peggy. And, she's that would be really fun to do something different like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll have to crash in her house for Christmas maybe next year.
Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah. So what's going on for news this week?
Well, the last time I spoke with you was the last day I was in the office, so I haven't even been in the office. However, just reviewing some of the headlines, and of course we post the headlines every day at openminds.tv, so if you go there, you'll see the links to these right on the front page. That's today, of course, Wednesday. We'll have some new ones tomorrow. But some of what's up there is kind of interesting. One of these being that supposedly, this website posted a story about a Columbus, Ohio sighting. It was a sighting that was actually posted on openminds.tv from November 29th when a witness was driving in the area of Columbus, Ohio, and had seen a large triangular-shaped craft. Now, a website called Inquisitor had posted a story about that and some of the other triangular craft sightings, because we've been talking about those. And so Moby Picker is the name of the site. It's kind of a news site that's geared towards mobile devices. But, yeah, they kind of picked up this story and talked about how these triangular UFO sightings are so popular lately and how there's been so many. And, of course, if you do go to the front page of openminds.tv, you'll see quite a few triangular UFO reports, many of which you and I have spoken about in the last few weeks.
Right. Gee, there's just so many of them. And basically they're all silent. I think I've only heard of a couple of cases where anyone talks about like any type of noise, a buzzing noise or something like that. But it just seems like very similar. And
in a related story, a mystery often. Now, there have been some MUFON videos posted recently, and I've even passed on posting them on our website because the person says, I saw a triangular craft. There was no noise. You watch the video. It actually looks like lights from an aircraft, which can look triangular. And you can hear an aircraft in the video. And it could be, I don't know that these people are necessarily hoaxing, but, when we have aircraft in the background all of the time, sometimes people just tune that out. They don't, they just, so it takes someone else to listen. So I think a couple of those recent videos were definitely aircraft, jetliners. However, sometimes, because if they are completely silent, they're also Chinese lanterns. And, of course, a lot of these are launched for the holidays, especially on New Year's Eve, so we'll be seeing a lot of those. And there is a story about that. The title in an Oregon paper called KVAL, actually a news website, they say Oregon bans frequent UFO and potential fire hazard effective January 1. And they are banning the Chinese lanterns. They're not the first. Other states have done this here and abroad. I think it was in the UK or it was somewhere in Europe where they banned them because they were a hazard to the cattle. They would come down and land on cattle, and then they would get burnt because there's, kind of a little candle or a fire inside of them. Most of them are pretty safe in that there's just a little padded thing with oil on it that lights, and it doesn't last for very long. And once it goes out, these things drop to the ground. However, Oregon has banned them. So their UFO sightings will probably go down. Wow,
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of, Oregon is very wooded, and I could easily see fire hazards that way. I don't know how many actually do cause fires. It's probably rare, but I'm sure it does happen.
Yeah. Well, and the homemade ones or others are a little more dangerous because there have been some that use like the little tea candles or something, and of course those candles can fall and stay lit. So there are more dangerous versions of the Chinese lanterns out there. And so as opposed to saying what kind you can have or regulating the types, it looks like they've just banned them across the board.
Well, good riddance to them if you ask me, but I know they are, they are beautiful. I've seen them, but it sure would make investigating a lot easier.
Well, an alternative, and this has happened to hoax people before, actually, been used to do that, but an alternative I have seen is now they have these tiny little LED lights, battery-powered, and they go inside of balloons.
Right.
So you can ride a balloon, have an inflatable balloon that floats with these little LEDs. People have tied these together before and launched them in order to hoax UFOs, but you could do that for fun as well. And, it wasn't too long ago, a party, I think this summer, that my girlfriend's daughter had, and we had some of those. And those lasted a long time. In fact, they went out of town, and I took them out of the balloons, and I put them in the bedroom in a row, so that when I woke up at night to go to the bathroom, I had this little, aisle to point me where to go so I wouldn't stub my toes. So, and it worked. I had stub-toe-free weekend there.
Wow. Now, those, I have seen those, and those really, I could totally see why someone, I mean, they look really mysterious, sort of like foggy, and, they look really strange. So I can see that. Those could be definitely another problem.
Yeah, and you can have any color balloons, so they can be multiple colors. Mm-hmm. And, what are you going to do? Well,
is that it for tonight?
That's it. That's all I got, buddy.
All right. Well, we'll be talking to you next year, actually.
Oh, yeah. Right? Oh, really?
Yeah. That's right.
Well, we'll talk. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Well, Happy New Year to you, man.
You too. Happy New Year. And, I hope you make some resolutions that
I can keep? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be good. All right.
Or just don't make any. That's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, that probably is the easiest way. All right, everyone. Hang in there for the quick music break, and we'll be right back with Ray Stanford. Ray, how are you? Welcome back to the show.
Oh, hi. I'm fine.
Always love speaking to you, Ray. We actually do talk quite a bit. Off the show. You're also a supporter of my show. I appreciate that very much. And you listen to almost every show live, which people in the chat room love when you call in. The only issue is my phone call-in system has not been actually working too well. But it is always great to hear from you.
Well, it's always a pleasure. Yeah, I noticed there's been some problems lately, but I hope you get that fixed up.
Yeah. Well, I update all the equipment, everything I have, and I just, some things that there are just no answers on how to fix that I can find anyway. But so, Ray, you have been doing all kinds of things. You're still, you've been looking up and looking down. We'll talk a little bit about that. You have been on a number of times, speaking, of course, about the Socorro case. The wonderful book you wrote is the best book out there on that incident, and that happened back in 1964. And you were there. You have been there. There was someone that noted a question in the forum. Has it been since the 1950s, or wasn't it the 60s when you first started looking into the UFO field?
Oh, no. I became interested in UFOs, believe it or not, in 1947, which was when I was 9 years old, and I actively got involved in investigating cases and trying to see and ultimately photograph UFOs in 1953. And I started an organization in Corpus Christi, Texas, which back in those days, they were called Flying Saucers. We were high school kids, and we called it Corpus Christi Flying Saucer Research Society. And so it began then. So I've been into this well over 60 years. And, of course, I became aware fairly early on that in order to do anything meaningful in this, you needed to have more than reports. You needed to get instrumented evidence, not just camera evidence, but electronic and optical evidences of other types. And so eventually, when I got to where I could afford it, I got into that and formed an organization whereby we eventually put together over $2 million in systems and equipment facilities, which quite successfully obtained some really excellent hard data on these objects, which I prefer to call anomalous aerial objects.
Now, this is $2 million back in the 1970s?
Yes, in the 70s. And that I'm talking about 70s money. I'm not talking about now. That would be, 20 or 30 times that amount now.
Seems
but
like
you could put the same instrument system together now for a lot less because of the advances in electronic technology. But if you were doing it today, that would be what was involved. I'm talking real terms in the 1970s, the mid-70s.
Wow, amazing. And What type of how did you get the backing for that?
Well, that I, in the first place, was involved with a nonprofit corporation where people could make nonprofit contributions, and I made it a point to let people know that this was the way to go. That everybody knew by that time that I was involved with the Socorro case, and my frustration in losing the zinc iron alloy hard evidence that had been scraped onto a rock, as I relate in my Socorro book. And so I got people behind me that wanted to see a new kind of evidence, an evidence that would that would cause real mainstream physics and science to take this seriously. And fortunately, our biggest financier was not contrary to rumors that I heard from South America that I was being financed by an intelligence community in the U.S. No, not at all. No, our main financier was a commercial real estate broker in Austin, Texas, and of course Austin was beginning to become a real economic boom town then, as it is now, and so we had very good financing from that wonderful individual, and there was also another individual that was a hydraulics engineer that was, although he had a home in California, he was usually somewhere in the Middle East, working for big oil companies there in relationship to the hydraulics work that they needed him to do. And so he was sending us several thousands of dollars a month in checks. I would interrupt my frame of thought on that and simply say that an interesting side event happened in that context. That was all private, and of course no one knew who was doing this, at least not ordinary people, but my wife's brother was in the U.S. Navy at that time, and he was stationed down in Norfolk. I say down because I'm up here in the D.C. area in Maryland, and he became friend with a guy here that lived in the D.C. area. And after he'd known him for about a year, the guy said to him, "Hey, Trip, have you ever heard of an organization in Texas called Project Starlight International?" And that's not to be confused with Stephen Greer's Project Starlight. It was a totally different thing of a serious scientific vein. And Trip said, "Oh, are you interested in UFOs?" And he said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Well, why do you ask me then?" He said, "Well," he said, "I have never told you this. I've known you a year, but I work for the CIA." And he told where he worked, which obviously worked in so. And he said, "If you had been in our office for the last several weeks," he said, "the most frequent name you would have heard called was Project Starlight International." He said, "What? Are they doing something wrong?" What he didn't tell him at that point was that he himself had donated $700 toward the 8-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on top of it around our two of our building facilities there. And the guy said, "Well, no, they're not, we don't know." He said, "What we're concerned about is that they're receiving a large check every month from an individual that is in sometimes he was in Saudi Arabia, sometimes he was in Bangladesh, sometimes he was in other places in the Near East, and they said we're concerned." He said, "Well, wait." Chip said, "Well, what is the concern if it's not criminal?" They said, "Well, we're concerned that some foreign nation or agency interested in embarrassing the United States government is giving that project money that could get evidence that could become embarrassing to the United States government, and we want to know who it is and whether it is some communist country or what it is that's giving them that might avail them that opportunity to embarrass the government." Now, isn't that interesting?
Wow, that is. Now, what the people that were backing of this this organization and your equipment and all that, did they have expectations? Did they want you to share the information in a certain way?
Oh well, yes. Of course, it was shared with them, and in fact, the biggest financier, the one from Austin, was with us on our fabulous trip in July of 1978. He was right there and saw every bit of it and operated one of the cameras.
Oh, and but how about the what was the what am I trying to say? What was the expectation as far as getting the information out to the general public? Was it something you were not willing to do?
The objective was never really to amuse the public with the UFO information. The objective was to get hard evidence. We were using, for example, we had, of course, a spectrographic camera, but more importantly than that, we had a recording extreme low frequency ELF magnetometer that would record with time correlation from WWVB binary time broadcast from Fort Collins, Colorado, along simultaneously with the sensor output of a recording gravimeter. And we got spectacular, absolutely amazing recordings with those that show not only that these objects have an extreme low frequency magnetic field and that we learned how it correlates with their maneuvers, but we also learned that the seeming, let's call it gravity-like waves that we were recording with the gravimeter had a very interesting correlation with the magnetic field, and we were able to show that as objects approached our camera, we could see a difference in the magnitude increase between the magnetometer output and the gravimeter output, and this tends to absolutely confirm the authenticity of the signals because a magnetic field, the field in these objects is dipolar two-field, drops off the inverse cube of the distance of the body of radiation. But a gravity-like field would, if it's monopolar as gravity is, would drop off with the inverse cube of the distance of the body of radiation. So you see a differential in drop-off. And this is exactly what we saw as, for example, we filmed and recorded this kind of data from a large mothership from atop Skull Valley Overlook in the Prescott National Forest on the afternoon, broad daylight of July 27, 1978. And as a smaller object came from the mothership and got near us, we can actually see, while they were filmed, we can actually see the increase in magnitude, but the difference in magnitude increases between the gravimeter and the magnetometer outputs, which is extremely important to physicists that are analyzing this to establish that they were two different parameters entirely and not, for example, magnetic induction acting on our gravimeter sensor. In the first place, it was shielded from magnetic induction.
Now, what do you think, Ray, of the two? I know you've actually tried to reach out to the two different systems out there now that are trying to do similar things. You actually offered free help to UFO Data and UFO-TOG, both. And what do you think about have you looked deeply into what they're doing? And if so...
well, so as I can determine, they're not doing anything significant at all. UFO-TOG is flashing a lot of fancy instruments that have been shown, but I've heard of no results. I've heard of no active field activities, and they have both thumbed their nose at me. I have invited them to come here and see this. People say, oh, you don't show it. I show it to people that are interested in doing science. I'm not in the amusement business. I'm not in the entertainment business. But I show it to people that have a scientific interest. And if anyone doubts that, I can privately show them here proof of major people, not only scientists, but and aerospace engineers, but people high up in the intelligence community, connections that have been here and appreciated what they was shown. But yet they thumb their nose at me and will not come. And so I have to question who they're listening to. They're not listening to anyone who has ever been here and seen this. I can guarantee you, if they were, they would be here. But they have not. They're listening to somebody else that has some kind of fantasies about me and my evidence, who has never seen it. And I could name names specifically in these organizations of people that had been invited. At one point, some of them said they would come, but never did. And I really, I'm always open to show it to people that are seriously into this. But I'm not at all impressed by either one of these organizations you named, because they, well, for example, one of the organizations I heard is now moving in the direction of putting up a satellite.
Oh, that's a different one. Little, yeah, that's a whole different one.
Yeah, well, no. The one I heard about is not the one you heard about. But I heard from somebody on the board of directors of another organization. And let me say that if one were to look at the evidence I have, one would realize that the best kind of UFO evidence will be the recording the effects of these of the fields of these objects upon backlighting that passes from behind them on toward, for example, the camera. And I have a wonderful example of this in Mexico I'd like to discuss and explain tonight. But you can, in the first place, these little satellites, these cheap satellites, a few $1,000s, they'll be up a few months, and they will decay and fall back down. And furthermore, the chance of getting anything significant and proving it was anything significant is very low. There are things about the atmosphere and filming in the atmosphere and the effects of lighting in the atmosphere that are much more conducive to getting hard scientific data that speaks to physicists, both theoretical and applied physicists and engineers. And I know this because I've had them right here in this very room and showed it to them, and we have discussed it in depth. Now, may I take a while and describe what I think is the single most important event that we ever recorded?
Yes, absolutely. And I have some questions related to the people who have looked at it coming up. So go right ahead. Okay.
The event I'm talking about, my wife and I and my daughter, who was 2.5 years old at the time, had been down to celebrate the birthday party of the great father of modernism in Latin American art, the late artist Carlos Mérida. We had been down there for his birthday, and he's the godfather of my children. And we were flying back from Mexico City. Now, our flight took off from Mexico City, and at 18:15 hours local time, that would be 6:15, north of Mexico City, we were over what's called the Tizayuca omnidirectional radio beacon. Now, I'm going to give explicit data so people can know I'm not making this up. This was a brand new flight number 56, Mexico City to San Antonio, Texas. We were on a flight bearing of 350, this was supplied me by the pilot, 350 degrees magnetic bearing, 35 statute miles south of takeoff, and we were passing through 12,000 feet when I saw the objects and started filming. Our ground speed was 330 knots. Our airspeed was 280 knots, and I was filming from the middle seat, 9B. My daughter was in the window seat, 9A. My wife was in the aisle seat, 9C. And as I said, we were over, when it began, the pilot said, over the Tizayuca omnidirectional radio beacon. And we were in a control flight zone where you have to have clearance to fly through it. And anyway, what happened is I looked out the window, and here was something that immediately looked incredible. To tell you the truth, we had just gone to the Anthropological Museum in Mexico City, and it seems a big stone carving of the plume serpent Quetzalcoatl, and which means the plume serpent. And out the window of the plane, the sun had just set. This, by the way, is the ideal time to film UFOs because the light is incredibly monopolarized. It's not scattered light. It's not randomly polarized. It's highly polarized. And I looked out the window, and we had passed through a layer of rain below us. The clouds were below us. There was another layer of clouds above us. But we were in the open at that time where there was no rain and only a few clouds that we filmed passing the airliner as we were climbing and filming the objects. But the object that we first saw looked like the plume serpent. It was crazy. I mean, I couldn't believe it. I said to my little daughter, who was 2.5, I said, "Look at that." I said, "That looks just like the thing we saw in the museum. Look at it. Look at that tongue out off the head, and looked like the raised rattles on the back." And it really did. But what it was, it turns out, it was, if I may use the vernacular, the mothership. It was electrifying the air around it, but because moisture on both sides, the electrification was, the plasma was quickly becoming ion vapor and becoming opaque, which is very nice because of what you can see in the film. And I'm watching this, and we're talking about it and how strange it is. I'm filming it, and all of a sudden, there's approaching it a most bizarre-looking object from the north. Now, this object approached it at a slant angle, I would say, off the top of my head, about 10 degrees relative to the horizon. When it came to the right, near the right end of this object that I called a mothership, it aligned directly with the axis of the mothership, flew parallel with it until it got to the left or south end of this object, Then it took off at an angle of about 70 degrees, slightly downward from my position, moving toward an amazing, huge delta-shaped object. This is in broad daylight. That is, at times you can see in the movie a streak that goes from it to an incredible large thing that's emerging from the cloud layer above that appears to be at least the bottom portion of another bigger, closer or bigger mothership. And you actually can see on the film objects that go to and from it at incredible speed. I did not see that part with naked eye. It was too fast, but it's on the film. But I was watching this object that I mentioned that approached the mothership. And here let me then break in and say that the object itself that was approaching was crazy looking. When I saw it on the film, it was even more puzzling than it looked to the eye. To the eye, I thought it was a fat, kind of a domed, fat disc with some kind of an ion vapor whirling at high speed like a lasso that a cowboy's rotating before he lassos a calf. And but when you look at the film, you see that it's actually highly organized plasma with patterns that generate and decay and regenerate and decay as it approaches the mothership and goes on past it. But here's the important thing about this film. Light was highly polarized, and of course, during the film, as has already been published in a major scientific, in a mainstream scientific presentation that occurred in Moscow.
Now what this film was? I'm sorry, Ray. This film was?
Yeah, a part of this was. Yes.
Yes.
This
is the first time I've heard you say that.
Oh well, I can send you a PDF on the scientific presentation. And everything. I'll mention that in a minute, but let me mention. That was only about the part, one of the small objects associated with this mothership decided to take off while I was filming it. And it generated, I understand that even if I had not been fitting to a beam splitter, which was putting the vertically polarized light to the eyepiece and the horizontally polarized light in the film, I would still have gotten Faraday rings because the light was so polarized because the sun had just set and I was pointing west. And that's been analyzed, and it was highly polarized. So when this thing took off, I can show you pictures of 20-some-odd concentric light and dark rings. And before somebody screams and says, oh, this is some kind of artifact of putting a movie film to copy it between two pieces of glass, and these are the rings that form from interface with the glass, it's pure baloney. The film that you see, the frame series that I show people were made by suspending it in air in a template where nothing is touching the film. And furthermore, the plane of radiation is in line with the plane of radial symmetry of the dipolar magnetic field of the object. And you see the actual tilt. Every ring is tilted, and you see it perfectly and beautifully. And but at many places in the film where other objects become quite active around this larger object, one actually sees what I would say were the vectorial, perhaps the vectorial summations of Faraday's rotation effect of the fields of the different objects, and you can actually see that a host of these objects are magnetic, and they're rotating the plane of polarization of the backlighting as it comes toward my camera. Now, much more important than that, as it happens, as I said, we were above the cloud layer we had passed through. But the mountaintops, fortunately on the west, are sticking through that layer. And there is a mountaintop directly under this mothership. And that mountaintop is, we have the data quite accurately, it was 134 statute miles away from my camera. And it's directly under the mothership. And I'm filming at 54 frames per second. And throughout the entire film, what happens is one sees this mountain at 54 frames per second. In 5 frames, it collapses from a mountain down into it looks like a flattened penny down against the cloud horizon. It completely flattens out.
Now, what do you think? What do you think caused this visual?
Well, okay, let me explain the rest of what happens. In the next 15 frames of the cycle, it rises back up. Then in the next 5 frames, you see it optically warped down again. The next 15 frames, it rises back up. This continues throughout the film, and this cannot be natural refraction because, one, we were climbing. It would not be even. It would change constantly because we're climbing to 12,000 feet up to cruise altitude of 25,000 feet. But furthermore, the rate of warp let me tell you the rate of warp. The shrink rate of the mountain under the carrier is 1.44 degrees per second. Now, 1.44 degrees is about 3 moons or suns on top of each other. That is orders of magnitude beyond the rate of natural refraction that can occur in the atmosphere. The shrink rate, where it goes back down for 15 frames, is 0.48 degrees per second. Now, this is real physics, but even more wonderful than that is that in all these optics, and this big triangular object off to the left, they're there, they're interacting, objects are flying around. But the most wonderful thing to the physicist is this. As you look at the frames, during the 5 frames of collapse, the backlighting changes wavelength. It has a red shift. It shifts from bluer to redder during the shrink phase of 5 frames. Then, during the next 15 frames, as the mountain rises back up, you have the blue shift from the red back up into the blue. This occurs again and again. Now, this is enough to make theoretical physicists jump up and down and shout hallelujah if they'll just come here and look at it. It's there, it's undeniable, and it is all good old-fashioned movie film, no digital tricks. It's absolutely, real emulsion film, and it's good high-quality Super 8 millimeter movie film, and it was filmed at 10 power, and as I said, at 54 frames per second. So there you have it. You have also this other object with this plasma whirling and these repeated patterns off the top of it. But this phenomenon, this is incredible physics. And by the way, the rate at which that is pulsing is commensurate with the rate that we recorded during a totally different event back in July 27, 1978. And one of the spikes of greatest magnitude during that, based on our Fourier analysis of the magnetometer, the ELF magnetometer output, was 7.2 hertz, and that is what that frequency average that I was filming from the airliner. So it's interesting. Now there were other spikes there in the ELF magnetic on July 27th, but that happened to be one of the second highest spike as far as of it occurring again and again. So here we have real physics that's being done, Martin, and this is the kind of thing that people ask me, why hasn't poor ufology ever been accepted by the scientific mainstream? The answer is they've been only presented reports. Reports are what people see and think they see, perceive, and in some cases misperceive. It does not give us quantitative data. Movie films, magnetometer recordings, gravimeter recordings give us quantitative data. And one might say maybe it was a gravity-like effect that was causing this mountain effect. Well, maybe it was. We didn't have the magnetometer and gravimeter on the plane, but in the other events, we had this out in West Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and we have the signal coming off the gravimeter sensor that is definitely correlated with the maneuvers of the objects and has a fascinating correlation with the magnetic field. So these are the things. This is why I said I want to address the failure of mainstream ufology and all of their conferences and celebrations. This is where, that's fine if you want to have fun, but if you want to do some science, don't sell trinkets to finance your UFO research, as certain major UFO organization does. Don't sell books. Talk sense to people. Show them that you can do some hard science, that you will do it, and they will finance it. I know. If I could do that in 1973, 74, 75, 76, 77, 78, they can do it now and more easily because there are ways on the Internet to appeal to people and show them what you intend to do and how you intend to do it.
Right. A bunch of questions came in while you were talking. First of all, your camera. What camera did you have that shoots 50 frames per second?
Oh, well, let me pull it out here just a minute. I'm going to let me pull the album with some of these pictures from the movie in it, and I have all the data on the camera right here. This was a really excellent camera. Hold just a second, if I make a little noise here. I'm pulling this old album from 1980 out of his box, and let me see. I have PowerPoint presentations with his name too, but I don't have them up on my PC.
Okay, while you're doing that,
so.
I'll ask you another question. How do you get a magnetometer? I don't even know how to say that. Magnetometer. Thank you. To read out in hertz.
To read. Oh, yes, very. You record it. I mean, it's our. Just a minute. Let me hold it just a second here. I've got to find the right thing here. He hopes that thing is not missing. Oh, it looks like one of them.
The camera's not really. We can just move on.
Okay. Anyway, let me. God, this is really strange. I think. God, I think
magnetometer.
From me.
I think that's kind of how to say it.
The question was, how do you get one?
How do you get one to read out in hertz?
It's easy. That's cycles per second. All you simply do is, well, in the first place, let me explain. This unit was recording both the sensor output of the gravimeter and the magnetometer in WWVB. In IRIG format, which is a digital format that the Navy, for example, uses. And in fact, one of the key physicists designed in the designing of the unit for us was a naval physicist, and it records in binary digital form. But what we do, there's simply we took it out to the company that made it, and they took the tape out of the machine and put it on a graph and actually gave us an analog graph of the whole all the events that we recorded it in. And we sat there and discussed it and analyzed it, and they showed us how the gravimeter output could not be an artifact, that it appeared to be a real signal that was reaching the sensor. And so you can sit right there and you can see the seconds clicking off and the waveforms. You can count them. There are ways to digitally run this through and print it out on a computer now, but you can simply sit there and look at our analog graphs and count them for yourself.
Okay. All right. So one of the things that I was thinking of when you were talking about the possible propulsion or whatever was happening with the physics of this craft and other crafts early on when you were talking about your research project there, what do you think happens when you hear about these electronic interference situations, like when a car goes dead or someone's watch or whatever, when a UFO is near? How does that fit into the whole scheme of things?
Well, yes, it's a well-known phenomenon, and it does happen sometimes. I don't know if it will happen as much with the way our cars are operated now as they used to be, but it's hard to say exactly. There's not a whole lot of studies. There's a good case that Mark Rydiger put together of these effects on automobiles and other machines, which is nice, but we need the magnetometers. We need not only ELF, we need other in higher frequency magnetometers to talk about what has happened. But we need to concern ourselves not so much about the fact that it might, by the way, there's nothing that exotic about stopping a car or a tractor or a truck with a electromagnetic device. The government has these now and has developed them and had them for a long time. Now, I'm not going to say that was based on anything we learned from UFOs. We do have a lot of good physicists and electronics people that could easily figure out how to do that. You don't have to pull it out of a crashed UFO. But anyway, what we need to look for is what can we learn from these objects? It's not what people think they see or the fantasies they build in their mind. We're all human beings. I mean, I know this from my own experience. You have to get objective. You've got to have instrumented data. We've got to forget this business of pawing over reports and analyze electronic data. And people need to come here, Martin, for another reason. If I can get anybody here for a few days, I can teach them by showing them what we recorded in these films. I can teach them to recognize how the real objects look in broad daylight. You can see the physics operating around them. These fake pictures that people are coming out with in Photoshop jobs, etc., they are based on comic book ideas of what UFOs are. They have no idea what the real thing is like, and I laugh at them. And then we have so many pictures of tinselized mylar balloons that look weird. Oh, the balloon isn't shaped like that. Well, tinselized mylar balloons can be bought in almost any farm, and if you want another farm, you can have them made. But these are not UFOs. And if anybody would come here for a few days, they'll at least absolve themselves of the delusion that a lot of these things being put out on the Internet are real films of UFOs. They're not. I can tell you that both in history and in the present time, the real images of these objects are less than 1% of the things that are put out as being images of anomalous serial objects. And I could do a whole 9-month course for anybody who wanted to take a course in that. But it's more important to actually, for example, answer the question that I had: how is that light shifting wavelengths from the blue to the red and back up to the blue in these pulses? That is so exotic that if you can answer that, you may be in for a Nobel Prize. Now, there's another phenomenon of UFOs that we need to look at very, very seriously, and this was totally shock to me. I mean, it was totally unanticipated by me or anybody connected with me or anybody I'd ever talked to. When you film these real objects in broad daylight, they produce multiple images. There are multiple images of them generated around them that are not only literally you can see every view in some instances. It's not just the view you're seeing. For example, I have two excellent examples in which up above the object is the whole object clearer than the object filmed in broad daylight on edge on, turned 90 degrees where its axis of radial symmetry is pointing toward the camera, and such you see it rotated upward, flipped upward at 90 degrees, and there are other images around. If that believe me, I have pictures, I have movie films. One take, my wife and I, on February, I think it was 16th, 1986, we were going to Andrews Air Force Base here on the east side of D.C. that's charged with protecting the nation's capital. It was on a Sunday afternoon. We were going to have dinner with a colonel, Air Force colonel, friend of ours. And by golly, we saw two of the motherships. One of them just fathomed out just like that. The one remained, and it launched objects. And during this is the best example that I have of the multiple imaging. It is incredible. I can show you frames from that film in which you can count hundreds of multiple images. I have other examples of this kind of thing too. But there is no simple, ready explanation for this, even based on physics that people have already talked about. I believe if we can get serious scientists to look at this, somebody, and I've said this to many people, will get a Nobel Prize, because this is maybe even more important than the thing I'm talking about, the mountain collapsing and the wavelength of light changing. This is something really, truly exotic. I could, but I don't like to because I'm not really a theoretical physicist at all, not near there. But I could talk about what I have discussed with others and what might create this. But you have to get into quantum mechanics, and that's something that nobody really understands. You have to express it mathematically. But anyway, that's another one of the phenomenon. Another one, not quite as important, but very important, is the fact that these objects distort space-time around themselves and therefore create what I call the geometric surround, which can be it can be a rhombus, a four-sided thing. It can be a polygon of various types, and it can change depending on certain factors. But I have films of this, and also I have a picture taken in Brazil from a government project that was down there in 1977, in which an object was photographed from their aircraft in broad daylight. And the object looks like glowing all over, but definitely you can make out there's some sort of probably a dome disk. But when you look at the shadow down, which goes across a stream or a river down there in the jungles, the shadow is four-sided, which means probably that the person on the ground would look up and think they were seeing a four-sided object while up above, where you're not seeing that effect of the warping of the light passing around it. You're seeing a disk. So that in itself is interesting, but it's not nearly as exotic and important to physicists as the other two phenomena that I mentioned.
Ray, when these people you were talking about earlier, high-ranking officials or high-ranking and somewhere in the government. I know that you're right there at Goddard Space Center because I visited you there, and we went over there together, had a great time. But when you're talking about when these high-ranking people have actually come to your house and have seen these things, what were their reactions?
Oh, tremendously excited and positive. I mean, absolutely, there's never been a negative person at all. I mean, I love to get people that just are skeptical or just say, man, I can't buy this stuff, and bring them in and show it to them. And they change their attitude real fast. You know, the people that really go for this and understand it are the people with the most education. People, the media make the like you think, seem to make people try to get them to think that it's only uneducated people, maybe somebody who never had an high school education in the Ozarks, that believes in it. Oh no, the higher you, the more you are educated, particularly in aerospace engineering, electronic engineering, physics, the more likely you are to accept the possibility of, for example, alien life, alien technology, and it potentially visiting the Earth. But these people also are the ones that have the background to see it and appreciate it. You appreciate something in some extent to the degree to which you understand it. And they understand readily these things because most of them have background in this physics. And I'm not going to call names, and I don't want you, if you already know the name, to call it. I mean, one well-known, internationally known, major world-class theoretical physicist came here, and he said, I really appreciate what you're showing me. He spent, I think it was 10 and a half hours here, and he just handed me a check for $1,000 and said, I appreciate it, Ray. Thank you.
Wow. Now, someone was in the chat room is wondering why don't you publish when you have something this good?
Why should I?
Well,
I'm not here to entertain the public. I'm not here to convince anybody that ET is here.
All right.
It's
well,
not
let me just say,
me.
along those lines, Ray, what do you think the advantages of hanging on to this? And do you think if someone else has something really, really good, like a really good film, that they should also, keep it private like you are and show just certain people?
Well, if they have the film, they must not know it. But I would probably have heard about it by the grapevine, I would think. But even if there's things out there, look, the average Joe does not know what this means. Does not understand the importance of it to research and development. The people I deal with do. This has been my goal. I think I told you when you were here, I probably showed you a picture of some pretty good-sized rockets I built and launched on Padre Island in my high school days. I got in my senior year, I got the top award in the physical sciences, the Texas Junior Academy of Sciences, for my paper called Experiments with Multiple Stage Principal Rocketry. I built and launched it. My dream was to get people into space. Not for them to go out there and to see UFOs and be convinced that aliens are visiting us, but because I have always felt the more we see looking down on the earth, as the late Edgar Mitchell said, when you look down and you see the world, you realize, hey, here's all these people caught up in all these hatreds and problems in there, but we look very much as one from out there. I have always believed that the more we see the universe, hopefully, maybe this is a pipe dream, but that will happen. This is my goal. And I have, if anybody has bothered to spend the mere $9 or whatever it is to get Chris Lambright's book called X Descending, half of which talks about how I helped the government get the secret of the beam ahead to travel through the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds without ever having to push the atmosphere away and produce a sonic boom and thus spend a lot more energy than they otherwise would. If they've bothered to spend $9, if you don't do it and read the darn thing and see his evidence, he did a wonderful, wonderful job of documenting, conclusively proving that I was the one that gave him the idea. And that's one thing I have given. I'm proud of it. And as he thanked me, my wife was a witness to at least one of the 3 times he thanked me. He said, for giving your government a quantum leap through the atmosphere and into space this week.
Do you know if that technology, the beam ahead, is still being researched?
I only suspect it is. I see no reason why it isn't. I know that the magnetodynamic craft that was involved, that Chris talks about there, that it was no secret. I mean, I found it on the internet. They had a multi-million-dollar grounded. They had to power this with a microwave beam, so they have a very microwave shielded, nice, beautiful, what call it a mobile home type situation that is totally shielded and grounded, and has nice Western Indian decorations in it, and so on and so forth. And they do that because they're launching these things, and they can be microwave scatter, and that was happening. I've seen that. It's probably been 8 years ago now, so they must be a lot further beyond that. But believe me, when it gets to a certain stage of R&D, research and development, you're not going to hear about it. You don't hear about these things until 10, 15 years later, when they become economically integrated into financial necessities of transportation. You don't hear about it. But I am proud that I gave that, and I asked nothing for it whatsoever, as can be verified by anybody who knows about the situation, and by the guy who brought his professor for me to show this to him. They were at an advanced propulsion conference at Goddard Space Flight Center, and he told me that they learned far more with me that week than they ever learned there. And he asked me, he said, Ray, but I'm embarrassed to ask you this, but we don't know how to land this darn thing. He said, we have this magnetodynamic field, which means they are electrifying the air into a plasma around it, moving it with a magnetic field. But with that spinning around, if we rotate landing gear out into that, chaos, shock waves can set up, and we can crash the thing, kill the pilots, and so on. And I said, of course, let me show you how they do it. And I showed him a drawing from a multi-witness case in the Caribbean, where occupants actually got out of the thing. And I said, now look carefully. I said, you're talking about opening these landing gear out on the flange, out of the edge of the flange, because that's in typical sense of physics, that's the safest place to have them if you don't have that torrent of magnetodynamic flow going, that tornado going around it. But I said, look, you can't do that. Where you do, you open that, you have the magnetic coils out there, you have that flowing out there, but there's a still place in the cone of the magnetic field. You open them there. And he says, my gosh, gee, I don't know why I didn't think about that. In appreciation, a few weeks later, and I have it, he sent it to me, he gave another talk in D.C. at a major conference of this type, and he drew the landing gear in the way I showed him and sent it to me in appreciation. Well, I'll tell you what the PhD student that got him down here in the first place told me. They left here one night at, I don't know when they left, but they got back to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York at around 2:30 in the morning. He said, I saw Professor Marable. He said he ran up the stairs as soon as he got here to the electronic drafting machine on the upper floor, drew the new schema for the landing gear in, and sent it immediately to the Aerospace Technical Intelligence Center, Dayton, Ohio. So I had direct input into the design of that, and I can prove it because he sent me the thing here that showed it in there, and there's no reason for him to have sent it if I had not been the one that gave it to him, and they did not know how to land it until I told him.
Now, this is Hal Puthoff?
I'm sorry, what?
Was this Hal Puthoff?
Hal Puthoff. No, not Hal Puthoff. No, this wasn't Hal Puthoff. This was Professor Lake Marable, L-E-A-K-M-I-R-A-B-O.
Oh, Marable. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I don't know why I was confusing the two. Okay.
No. Hal Puthoff is not an aerospace engineer. Marable is an aerospace engineer.
Right.
And he also, I'll tell you an interesting story. He asked me, he said, would you be willing to show all this and whatever you want to show him to another major aerospace engineer from California if I can get him out here to see you? I said, sure. Well, he said, look, I'm going to put him in contact with you. I didn't hear from him. Anyway, finally, after 2 weeks, I heard from him. He said, I am frustrated. He said, I have pleaded with him. I've offered to pay all his expenses to come see. I've told him that you will give him the quantum leap that I talked about. And he said, I wanted him to come. And you know what he said? He said to me, I would not go across the street to talk to any lying SOB that claims he filmed a UFO. And you know what Professor Marable told him? Wonderful guy. He said, look, okay, presume that he's crazy and it's all a hoax, but go listen to him anyway. You'll learn something.
That's pretty funny. Let's see. So I think I told you we do have some questions in the chat room. Also, one of the thoughts, I've been thinking about, and I talked earlier with Alejandro about triangles, and I know you mentioned that in the Mexico sighting, you said the large craft was a triangle, but what do you make of all the triangle sightings? It just seems like there's so many. And have you seen, just to follow up with that, have you also seen a change in what people are seeing through your many years of research?
No, absolutely not. So, when you have an advanced technology that is so advanced, so far beyond us, that you don't need to change models every 2 years by new breakthroughs. Listen, I filmed these things the first time that I got several types of triangles, broad daylight filmed, was during the 12-12-77 event from Braniff Flight 9, when I was flying back from being on the old TV show To Tell the Truth, and from LaGuardia to Dallas-Fort Worth. And but I have subsequently, and I can't name it, but even at certain, I was certain government installations, I actually have two amazing films that I got when I was at government installation, nothing to do with government objects, but that happened to be visiting the sky at that time. I've got wonderful examples. I know, I wish I could get that wonderful guy, I can't remember his name, Dave, that does the research on triangle objects. He's a nice guy.
Oh, yeah, Dave Mahler.
Dave Mahler, yeah. And I wish I could get him here. He keeps saying he will come, but he never makes it, like the rest of these guys. If they really believed me, though, if he really knew what I could show him, he'd be here tomorrow. Because I have daylight film. I have, for example, now the biggest one of these types, there were these objects shot in near this gigantic carrier on 12-12-77. Actually, there are three of these gigantic carriers. I'm talking about the one that was, two of them were down nearby and shot a plasma beam into a thunderhead off to the southeast of us and drew plasma around, tried to conceal himself. The other one was up in the stratosphere and beautifully clear and with wonderful plasma arrays that did not become ion vapor. And before that thing left, big black triangular objects came and docked point down under the bottom of it. Let me first say that we have two methods of determining the size of that object. We spent $189,000 studying that film alone, and we determined the distance and the size of these objects. These objects are huge, and they dock point down under an object that itself is 14,000 feet long. That's 2.65 miles. And they are huge, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of feet on the side. And they dock with a point down, but the side that they put up to the bottom of this object, and I'm not going to bother to go into – I actually know the shape of this object. It's not round. It's long. It's 30 times longer than it is thick. But it actually – where they plug in the bottom, you actually have a slight wedge in it, an angle that goes in. That's not a flat side, and that side is the one that goes up and docks underneath the bottom. Now, why do they dock that way? Because there's magnetodynamic flow. It's electrifying the air for use in the atmosphere. It doesn't need this in space, but it's using magnetodynamic flow, and you would interfere with it. But by putting the point down underneath, you actually, in theory at least, would probably enhance the lift effect of the magnetodynamic flow. But before that film ends, 6 of these objects docked point down beneath that incredible object. Is so big we jokingly don't call it the mothership, we call it the grandmother. And then it rotated about 9 degrees, went slowly up, and all of a sudden there was this incredibly brilliant flash, and it vanished completely. Now, that is the biggest type. But I have a wonderful film from let's see, I have movie film, and I have still film with good pictures from October 15, 1984, when there were, the witnesses in the front yard were my wife, me, my 2 oldest kids, the tax lawyer from next door, and his wife. And we had 6 additional witnesses in Llano, Texas, to a lot of this. But we actually saw and photographed, we got to see at 48 power and photograph at 12 power. We had a 4-power view device on top of my camera to make it at 48 power. But we got photographs of the mothership, which is small. It's relatively small. It's 1,400 feet instead of 14,000 feet. And we have, there are several types of deltoid objects that come up to that thing. But my favorite one is what I call the flying wing. And it actually has a one wing. You can see triangular objects docked on its wings, smaller triangular objects. And on the nearer wing, you can see the spaces, the lighter blue spaces where apparently 2 of these objects were sitting but had presumably taken off. And it's very daylight, and you can see the reflection of the glow of the mothership off the back edge of this beautiful wing and the devices on the wing. It's all daylight, light and shadow. And Dave Marler would go crazy to see this. But there are numerous types. There was also from the 12-12-77 grandmother, as we called it, there's another type that's a delta that has flat sides, but the vertices are rounded. And it has some interesting features on it. And I have numbers of examples of that, and I also have pictures of that was photographed by a credible person in Brazil in broad daylight. So this has been photographed by more than one person, to say the least. Now, there's also another wonderful type that varies slightly in form, but I call the clip-wing delta. And you take the delta and clip the wings, and sometimes they have things that stick up on the tips of the wings that may be triangular and can change angles. But these things are beautiful and amazing, and I have some wonderful. My favorite shot of that was when I was on January 20th, 1977. I was flying down from Canada, and we were flying over, I believe, Kansas, broad daylight, and I followed a huge triangular object down from way up above the airliner, filming it, down to where it actually came down near enough to the ground that was partly snow-covered, and you can see the shadow of the object on the snow merge with where the object comes down. But around that object, when it was up higher above our airliner, one of these beautiful clip-wing deltas moved at incredible speed around the near side of it, and you can actually see the multiple imaging from it along its trail, and the beautiful thing is glowing a beautiful turquoise color. And then there's also what I call the curved wing swallow, the stratospheric swallow that's been described by people from on the ground in broad daylight. But I filmed it from an airliner at 39,000 feet, and it is beautiful. I challenge Dave Marler, if you hear this and anybody tells you about it, you better get over here. In other words, I want to show these to people that matter. I want them to understand and be able to tell people, no, these are not, yes, they're black project deltoid craft. Sure there are. But they are nothing. They are firecrackers. They're pyrotechnics compared to these things. These things, not only that I haven't mentioned, but they also have another property. It appears that they operate in locally compressed time. Do I have evidence of this? Yes, indeed, I do, and in films. And I'm not guessing. And there is film evidence as well as anecdotal evidence from some cases that suggests that these things locally compress time. And that's not original with me. I mean, John Keel was talking about that idea way back several decades ago. But I do have film that gives some awfully convincing evidence that that's happening.
Okay, Ray, well, we are out of time. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Well, my pleasure.
And we'll have to have you back, of course, as always.
Look forward to it.
All right. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember, you can listen to the full 2-hour show and download it into your media player for only $2 or more a month. That information is on podcastufo.com. I want to thank our guests, of course, and people that help out with the show. And next week, we have Harry Drew, and he's going to be speaking on the Kingman, Arizona flying saucer crash. Now, I'm not really sure if that really did happen or not, but it should be an interesting show. We'll see you next week, and remember to keep your eyes to the sky.